Hey, welcome. If you're here today, it's either because you come to this free workshop series every month, you read my newsletter, or you saw it on my social channels. So you probably already know that I'm sharing a story today about a time that I acted out of character. I snapped. I snapped at the person across from me in my therapy office, and I walked away feeling like I was but I wasn't going to say that I failed, but I was certainly going to say that it was a failed session. And I think it's really important to share this particular experience because there's more to this story than meets the eye, or shall I say, that meets the ear. Because this story today and the entire workshop is about listening. So, hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me for Letters from Esther Live, my monthly workshop series to help you reflect and develop greater confidence and relational intelligence in all your relationships. This series happens monthly on YouTube and Facebook Live. Subscribe. That way you know and you're there and we can talk to each other. For more letters from Esther, visit estherperel.com/blog. Every month, I invite you here on YouTube and on Facebook to discuss the newsletter so you can read it, you can hear me talk about it, we can discuss it together, and we can learn it from multiple different angles. But before we start, number one, consider reaching out to one person who you know may benefit from joining you in this workshop today. Who do you think could use a session on listening? Who hasn't been heard? Who could listen better? And as always, I encourage you to take notes, whether it's written in your notebook or on your pad, but keep a place dedicated to the notes from our conversations. You will begin to sense how much you're learning session upon session, building block upon building block, all developing your relational intelligence. And if you like what you learned today, again, like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. The button is right here below this video. So, as I was saying, I was, how would I say this? It was a bad therapy day. I have bad therapy days. And it was over this past summer. And I was already having one of those days when you just don't feel like you have much to give. I was languishing, as my friend Adam Grant would call it. That sense of stagnation and emptiness that feels like you're muddling through your days, looking at life through a foggy windshield. People have become so interested in that word because it describes a universal experience everybody seems to be having during the last 2 years in this pandemic era. Part of the reason languishing is so tough is because it's not severe enough to derail your day, but it's also not minuscule enough to not affect you. For me, I believe the opposite of languishing and its antidote is eroticism. The opposite of languishing, of stagnation, of blah, is when I get in touch with the vibrancy and the vitality of life, is when I tune into the senses and the environment. It's that rather than staying behind that foggy windshield and letting life pass by. But sometimes, even for me, especially for me, it's easier said than done. And this is true for many therapists like me who are meant to be able to guide people through that sense of feeling unmoored. So on that day in July, I was languishing and I had work to do. We were recording a one time anonymous couple session for my podcast, Where Should We Begin? But by the end of it, I was convinced that material was unusable. And that has not happened often. All the sessions that we have done have been included. So to have one where I'm like, I don't know if I can put this out there was very, very significant. The recently married early 30s white American couple and new parents was sitting across me, and they were bickering to no end. From sex to money to in-laws, they had fallen into quite a pattern of not hearing a single word that the other was saying. Well, they were hearing the words, but they were not listening. They were hearing the words for the purpose of rebuttal, and they couldn't help themselves from cringing when the other one talked, rolling their eyes, shaking their heads, and sighing every time that the other person spoke. I would listen to one person, but I would watch the other person get all agitated, and I couldn't listen anymore. I myself was getting derailed. So sooner or later, I was experiencing from the inside what was happening between the two of them. Hurt, and each partner, their whole body seemed to express the inability to accept a different reality from their own. But her tendency was to speak over him, to fill in all the details about his point of view, not as he had told her, but as she saw it, what she thought he should tell me, what she thought was important, and it was crashing the session. But he wasn't any better. He would let her talk, quiet, wait, cede. You knew he wasn't listening because he was organizing his rebuttal, and he wouldn't acknowledge anything of what she said that he may have agreed with. He would wait till he found the one thing that he could argue with, and then he would refute. So you can imagine the dynamic. And this is not unusual in high reactivity. And many of us have been in this situation, but many of us have been more so in this situation. So they were stuck in a feedback loop, leaving them both feeling trapped and frustrated. And I knew they wanted to be better. They wanted to be more caring because they were caring. They just couldn't, it got lost in between all the noise. They wanted to be more loving. They wanted to be more intimate. And this is why they came. So I wanted to know how long they had been hearing each other without listening. And I couldn't even get there. I mean, I could not make two steps forward without all the cacophony, basically derailing all of us. We couldn't have any specific conversation because they were locked in a cycle of negative escalation. Every sentence was a blame about the other person, an attack on the other person, a counterattack, and a defense. Usually, the path forward as a therapist is to help them develop the basic skills for self regulation, to lessen their reactivity, and to structure practices for listening. Usually, I would emphasize ways to connect to their own needs, and I would be empathic to their needs, but also to their ability to acknowledge the needs of the other. I wish I had said every once in a while, that is really hard. I feel for you. That makes me feel so bad for you. I said it, but I didn't really say it, because they were cutting each other off so quickly that I began to experience a sense of dysregulation myself. And I was being sucked into the feedback loop, and I lost my position as a therapist, and suddenly I snapped. So, at the risk of cringing myself, I want you to hear for yourself right now. Let's listen in on the session.
It's just hard for me because he speaks so slowly, and I feel like I'm so high energy. I always just want to get the facts across.
What fact I see is that when he talks, you are shaking next to him so he can barely keep his mind straight.
I know, I'm so angry.
I don't care the subject. Yes, but you don't know, you collect. Anything else I could be angry about?
Because he knows every single thing about my finances. And I don't understand how we're fine because the numbers he tells me, they don't match up.
If you want her to stop, you need to ask her.
I'm sorry.
I believe that is...
No, you need to do it.
May I stop you?
Sure, I'm sorry.
Not okay, may I stop you.
I know, he's so beaten down from me. I feel horrible, but I'm also angry.
Not may I stop you.
What should I say?
Just
I
stop
want to
me.
describe my situation myself.
Okay.
And could you please make the effort of managing your impatience and give me a courtesy of explaining my own situation?
All that.
No, you don't borrow. You have to do it.
Give me the courtesy of explaining my own situation.
Okay. Sorry.
Goal at this moment is really not to help them talk about money or their financial situation. The goal is for them to develop some basic skills about regulating together so they don't escalate. When he feels usurped that she took over because she doesn't trust he can tell his own story and she can do a better job at it, and he wants to reclaim it, he has to take it kindly, respectfully, and assertively so he can draw the boundary of I own my story and I will tell it as I see it. And I ask that you make space for me to do so and hopefully can hear it. And then I will hear your reaction to it. So we start with very basic work around the boundaries, the delineation, the demarcation between the two of them. It goes so fast, each one cutting the other person off, I can barely keep it straight. And I start to experience the same dysregulation inside myself. I've been there before, and it's not a good place to be because I start to lose my therapeutic stance. I begin to act with them the way they act with each other. I'm inducted into the system. You know, it's funny. I've played the clip a few times now. And there are three times that really stand out. Once, at first, I played it to my team. I wanted them to hear, but I wanted to know if they heard what I heard, basically. I played it at my annual conference, Sessions Live, which is a professional conference for coaches, therapists, people who work with relationships. And as a case of bad therapy, I showed it to my supervision group, which is a group of colleagues that meets to discuss cases and to consult with each other. My team cringed. And it made sense because I was cringing when I was presenting it to them. I mean, after all, the couple gave me license to be direct, but had I been too direct? I felt that my reaction had been inappropriate, but more importantly, I felt that my reaction was unhelpful. The conference attendees, they said that they were surprised by the vulnerability and they appreciated it. I appreciated that comment, but really, this wasn't about showing myself vulnerable. It may have been, but this was about showing how every therapist has their moments, and we don't get to see those moments often enough. I've always actually wanted to show work that wasn't perfect because I've always thought that one learns more from work that is less elegant, more poor work if you want. And it's the same was happening when I was the student and I was looking at my teachers. I don't want to see something that I don't know how I can ever do the same, you know? It's very, very reassuring to know, oh, someone else can flop as well. And when it came to my supervision group, one of the main things they said is, it's not as bad as you hear it to be. And I kept saying, you haven't heard the whole of it yet. But when you hear the whole thing, no, of course, I still think it wasn't good therapy. You know, that ain't changing. There's so many things that could have been done very differently. But what they also said is that we've all experienced that kind of session before. And sometimes when you have a patient who's not listening, we have to ask ourselves, might it be because they don't feel heard? And let me read you some of, your one word reactions to this clip. I want to just get a sense, as you've listened to this, what jumps at you? Have you been in either of these positions? Do you have an instant reaction to one person more than to the other? Give me a sense for a moment. How do you react to this little clip? And you can listen to the whole episode on Where Should We Begin on Spotify, on my podcast. It's it's a one of a kind. Let me know. You will notice that my team and the conference attendees and my supervision group, they each had a different reaction. And that's because each listened from a different vantage point. The context assigns the meaning, the context for the conversation, the context for listening, or let me put it differently. More importantly, the way we talk will influence the way the other person listens. This reminds me of the Paul Simon song, Sounds of Silence, people talking without speaking and people listening without hearing. Or was it people hearing without listening? It's probably the reverse. Yes, it is the reverse. And the quality of the listening shapes the way the story is told. So the way we talk influences the way the other listens. And the quality of the listening will shape the way that the speaker talks or the way the story is told. It's different if you listen alone, if you listen with a partner, if you're part of a team meeting, if you are in a 3-day conference, or if it's part of a short workshop, or if you're actually in the room. So let me tell you what was the couple's reaction, because the couple had an entirely different reaction than any of these groups. So I always go a few weeks later and I ask people to send us some feedback. Where did it land? What was helpful? What stayed with you? What would you want us to know about your experience? And it turns out that they had heard me very differently from how I heard myself. So I wanted to know, however inelegant my intervention had been, I wanted them to know that I was really invested in their well being, and I didn't feel like that came across in the way that I spoke to them. So I had a chance to just really make that clear and take ownership. But I was happily surprised to learn that the signs and that the things that had, between them had gotten a lot better, actually. Um, they told me in a letter that instead of staying neutral or diplomatic, like most people would have been, and like other therapists had tried to be, I told them what they really needed to hear. Amazing. This is like, really, I thought I was so harsh. And I realized that I had a second chance to listen to them deeply. She said, "You told us that we were not broken and that we can work through this. You gave me very specific things that I could do in the moment, and I've listened to it completely, and things have taken such a turn for the better." So I want to go back to something that I shared with you in the beginning. I told you eroticism is the opposite and perhaps the antidote of languishing, that feeling of experiencing life from behind the foggy windshield. I told you that eroticism is about tuning into the senses and the environment around us. The sense that we're talking about today is the sense of hearing, and more so, what we can do with it. Because there's a difference between hearing and listening. And thoughtful conversation, and good therapy for that matter, is about a healthy balance of thoughtful communication and hardcore listening. I want to know, did you identify with the couple that you heard on the clip? Do you recognize yourself? And if so, how? Just give me very short, quick responses so I can do a pulse check with you. Because I did too, and it's part of why I responded the way I did. We all know what it's like when we're locked into a dynamic of escalation with each person's thumb ready to push on the rebuttal button. You know, in fact, couples researcher Howard Markman, has said that when we listen to things that we don't agree with, our attention span is basically 10 seconds, which means 3 sentences. After 3 sentences, if I don't agree with what you're saying, or what you're saying feels assaulting to me, or feels like, I'm being ignored, basically I am having a reaction to it, I'm in rebuttal mode. I'm no longer able to listen. So this is very, very short. It's easy to repeat, to do reflective listening when the stuff that we're hearing is actually, pleasant, that we don't disagree with. It's stuff that I can easily repeat. But when it's stuff that I don't agree with, it's amazing how people cannot repeat the sentence they just heard. Time and again, this is what I see in front of me in my office. And these 3 sentences can so quickly derail the entire dynamic. So even if we don't interrupt, like this young man was doing, he began making mental notes every time she talked. At one point, he even says, I'm working hard at keeping a list. And of course, it meant the list of the stuff that I can refute, disagree with, counterattack on. So I want to give you an exercise. And with this exercise, I want to help you move away from hearing for the sake of rebuttal to listening for the sake of connection. I want you to imagine a situation where you want to bring something up. Okay? Think of a situation where you want to bring something up. Could be the most recent gripe that you have with your partner, your friend, your colleague, your family member. And now structure your sentence as an XYZ statement. This is from Howard Markman's work as well, from PrEP. Instead of you never, you always, you, the statement goes, when you do X in situation Y, I feel Z. So it's like the woman on the clip. She could have said, when you don't share our finances with me, and I know that we have a whole new set of expenses now that we have a child, I get scared. I get worried. What can we afford and what can't we afford? That uncertainty makes me very nervous. When you do X in situation Y, I feel. Instead of saying you never listen, try when I pour my heart out and when I tell you that this bothers me, or I tell you that this hurts me, and you sit there and you say nothing, I feel like you don't care. I feel ignored. When we do it this way, X, Y, Z, it puts the emphasis on how we feel, and that nobody can argue with. This is my feeling. This is my experience of what you do. It's not the same as my saying, this is what you do. So instead of defining the other person, which everybody will balk at, I actually own my experience in response to what you do. It makes a world of difference. Instead of you never tell me anything about your finances, it becomes when you don't tell me much. And I am working 3 jobs, as she said. I am left feeling very vulnerable. That's an XYZ statement. So, as a take home practice, you come up with a few more examples of recent situations in which you and someone that you care for got locked in a cycle of escalation. Anyone? And think about how listening differently to one another could have changed the entire conversation. And go back to that person and say, I want to try it differently. We absolutely didn't get through. We locked horns. We just went at each other. Can I try this again? I think we can do better. And then you just own your part, because generally when one person does this, so does the other person, you know. So redo the conversation with XYZ statements, and then you'll tell me how this went. So now I want to go for a minute and read what some of you have read here, because you've given me so many comments. I did identify with the angry one. My person doesn't talk much. Yeah. I do what the man did, but I usually snap, and at the end, I can't respond at all, and I just feel caged in, and I run it over and over in my mind again and again. Verbose and shut down places. I have gone in many difficult conversations. I empathize. I also remember being a child around that dynamic and having no agency. Good people, you really are getting what we're talking about here. It's the negative cycle dance when we are triggered and only listen to attack back. The woman was too angry to XYZ. Yes, but I could have worked with her and just said, pick one statement and don't start with the finances. Don't start with the most challenging subjects, money, sex, in laws. Start with something very simple. You know, as she said, when I saw him eating these pop-up tarts, you know, I I feel sad for you because I'm remembering, you know, the neglect that you experienced and the aloneness that you experienced as a child. That gives him a very, very different sense. And this is a passage in the session actually where she does that. And he receives it not as an attack, but as an empathic statement. And it's immediate. So listen to the whole session. You will see that she actually does it. She just doesn't do it enough, and he could do more of it as well. When you blow off a dinner with me at Christmas and don't acknowledge my hard work and success for the company, I feel undervalued and distant from you. Shouldn't we start with the I feel? No, there is something in the structure because it contextualizes. When you do X in situation Y, I feel. Because it changes the reactive cycle. It does say I am reacting to something you do, but it puts the emphasis on my experience, on my reaction, and on the subjectivity of this, and not just on the fact. This is what you do. See, if anybody says to you, this is what you do, the first thing you're going to come up with is the one time when you didn't, because you're going to refute, because it's too invasive. Nobody wants somebody else to tell us who we are. But we are more willing to listen to how they experience who we are. That's the real shift here. God, it's so hard to do this in the moment. Mary, just tell me which. I'll try to rehearse it with you. Zainab, amazing exercise. I've been doing XYZ for years and in my relationship, and it works. Yes, Mary Page. Does you do X not qualify as a soft startup? However, always it's when you do. The wording is really, really precise here. It's when you do this, when you don't respond, when you attack, when you ignore, when you say such and such, at the moment that, or in the situation that I experience it or I feel Z. Very, very precise. My ex would have said, you don't really feel that. You're just making it up to pick at me because I can never do anything right. Master wordsmith was hard to have a convo with. Yeah, Paula. Basically, what he was saying is that your feeling is not something that you own. Your feeling is something that you're doing to him. This is part of the same kind of high reactivity dynamic, is that one person's feeling is experienced by the other as something you're doing to him. If you're cold, if you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're sad, if you're hurt, it's something you're doing to them on purpose to make them feel bad, to blame them. That is such a lack of boundary, you can see. But I can't. I wish I could enter into each one of these. Etienne, her intrusiveness maybe needed a resolute, passionate, non-diplomatic intervention boundary, which is what you did. Looks like it might have gotten the job done, however cringe. Yes, indeed, I do think it got the job done. Sometimes a very inelegant intervention is actually what is helpful. That is true too. And sometimes you think you've done the most beautiful intervention and it lands you nowhere. So yes, I am very well aware of that. I had an experience where I did, this is Beth Foster Hunter, where I did this naturally the other day, and it really opened up a close understanding. Yup. Lindsay, when you tell me if my feelings are wrong, it makes me feel, yes, of course. When somebody starts to argue with your feelings, there's a problem, because normally they just are. I'm cold. What do you want me to do with this? You want to attack me because I'm cold? You shouldn't be cold. The heater is on. It's like, I'm hungry. Like, you shouldn't be hungry now. We just ate 3 hours ago. Like, what are you arguing with, Riley? Right? Michal, it's life changing. Yes, perfect timing for me. The XYZ. You have to have an emotional vocabulary to do why. Yes, yes. Do some. No, okay. Wow, people, you many here. Sue, I felt like the first stages of marriage locked in a power struggle. It takes us 17 years, but you got there. Your ability to interpret language means everything, Joyce. Thank you. Denial about starting when you don't. Seriously, people, I'm going to repeat it. When you don't respond to me, no, no, no. People do something when they don't respond to you. They raise their eyes, they smile, they turn their head, they shake. When you do X, don't start with when you don't do X. The don't do something is something else. Really, really precise. And I'm going to say it again, start with small things. Don't go to the hardcore issues. Tom, when it seems to me that you, does XYZ work with narcissists? Try it out and you come and tell me. All of these ones, listen, people, you don't just do it. And, for some of you, you did it and it changed and it was just so immediately meaningful. For others, it may take a while. But it's about you extending that also to the other person, right? So when somebody's fighting and suddenly someone does this, it disarms. They're expecting you to come back. And if instead you say, I can see that, it makes sense that, I understand that all these statements are going to counteract what is expected as the attack response. We're coming to the end here, but people, these are amazing. Lynn, this is so out because you're not saying you always. Listen, do you always and do you never, these totalistic, all encompassing statements, shove them. They are, by definition, the most triggering ones because the minute you say to someone you always, they're thinking about the one time when they're not. They can't, it's too it's too invasive. And when you say you never, they'll tell you the one time when they did. So you can't go with that. Plus, you always and you never is a subjective statement meant to convey an impression, a sentiment. It's not something you're going to factually confirm. So don't go for the pseudo factual conversation. Understand that what you're really trying to communicate is your feelings, and what you want is for someone to understand them, to hear them, to listen, to validate, and maybe to have some empathy for them. That's the simple trajectory here, which is not that simple. Oh God, these are amazing. Beth, how do you know when to do a direct intervention like you demonstrated, and when to withhold that instinct to fix and simply listen? Look, when people come to me and they're entrenched in a thing like that, it's not a good thing to just let them do this in front of me. I was stopping them non-stop, micro moment by micro moment, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because people feel so stuck in this. They don't want to be that way. And they're not like that with other people for that matter. So it's very important to not let people just degrade in front of us. That is my point of view. And so in that sense, but there are other ways to be directive. I was directive, challenging, confrontational, and not particularly empathic. And I could have done that very differently. That's the main thing. So people, there's a lot. When my partner doesn't use XYZ, where are you, Judith? Just attacks me with you always. What do I do? I want to hear what you say because you're trying to say something that really matters to you. Can we try this differently? Can you and I heard this woman with that accent and she gave me this structure XYZ. Can we try that? Just because we're not getting anywhere and I know we want to hear each other. So you have to make that assumption from him. Anyway, people, this is for you to practice. I want to hear from you. Write to us. Read it on the blog. I broke it down in pieces. Go listen to this session as well on the Spotify channel. And I don't mean to be mean. But is the name of this episode. Let me know how it goes. Thanks everyone for joining. And I hope that you will join us next month for Letters from Esther Live. And follow along by signing up for my newsletter if you haven't done so already at www.estherperel.com/blog, and follow at Esther Perel Official on social media. This is incredible, all of you. I mean, I wish I could read many more of these and respond personally, but thank you, Francesca, Anna, Sayusaime, Christopher, Maureen, Jody, Ivana, Ivan, Natalie, Jasmine. I mean, all of you from all over the world. I see you. I hear you. I see you. I listen to you. So long. Bye.